Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Nakamura has just played knight takes d4. Kramnik answers with bishop takes d4, giving up the bishop pair, but it's the best move in the position and secures white an edge after bishop takes d4 check. Although Fritz thinks that Kramnik now lost the majority of the edge with his move king h1. Fritz preferred instead knight f2, where after, for example, queen f6, c takes d5 and f4, Black doesn't have sufficient compensation for the pawn, at least not yet. It's possible that his bishops could become a potent force later on though. But after king h1 comes f4, gaining further space on the king's side, but this was a somewhat dubious continuation. Essentially it's a pawn sack because white has knight takes f4 here, followed up with rook takes d4, and this would gain black the open g file, which in combination with king h8 must be, one of Nakamura's plans for attack. However, Kramnik again declined the sacrifice and played rook b5, which he said he felt was very nice and precise as a move, and Fritz agrees that this was the strongest continuation. So now came queen f6, sacking the d-pawn to generate some piece pressure, but this is a questionable idea objectively speaking. After rook takes d5, and now came bishop e6, which is a bad mistake from Nakamura, who must have had a momentary lapse in concentration and forgotten about the tactics available now on the d4 bishop, because f takes g3 was better, and after h takes g3, now bishop e6 is a decent continuation with some compensation for the pawn, although white is still better, objectively speaking. After bishop e6 came a great move from Kramnik. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Knight takes f4 is the move that Kramnik played, and he spent 20 minutes trying to figure out what Nakamura's idea was with bishop e6, and came to the conclusion that there was nothing there, that was just an out-and-out blunder. And as I said, this discovers a second attacker on the bishop here at d4, which is only defended by the queen, and so it wins a pawn after g takes f4, which is better than bishop takes d5, because now comes knight g6 check, king g8, knight takes f8, and white is at least 2 pawns up, which is in fact the same as the game continuation, but the position here for black is less favourable. So knight takes f4, g takes f4, and now rook 5 takes d4, and f takes g3, and h takes g3. So the smoke clears and white is 2 pawns up. In Kramnik's opinion, there's no compensation for black here, and Fritz agrees, although Nakamura is now able to finally get a rook to the semi-open g file with some pressure, at least with rook g8. So now comes rook f4, played with tempo on the queen. So queen g5 and rook h4, threatening rook takes h6 if queen takes g3 now. So rook g6 and now queen c3 check, which is a nice move. The idea behind it is to get the queens off the board and thus make the win less complicated for white. After king h7 comes f4, so protecting the g3 pawn. So after queen takes g3, which is just about black's only choice, anything else in his disadvantage increases by quite a lot. Now queen takes g3, rook takes g3, bishop takes b7, wins back the lost pawn and creates a passed pawn here on c4 that will be decisive later, so Kramnik remains 2 pawns up. Now came rook b8 and bishop e4 check, and king g7 from Nakamura, and from here it's more or less a matter of technique, and Kramnik is among the finest endgame players in the world, as we saw in his game against Van Wely earlier in the tournament. He provides us with another flawless display here. First played king h2, which is gaining a tempo on the rook, and Nakamura is of course playing for a draw here and hoping for a swindle. With perfect play he could put up a resilient defense, but eventually the win would be inevitable for white. Nakamura continued with rook e3, attacking the bishop, and Kramnik now threw in a check with rook g1, and after king f7 he played bishop g6 check. Now came king e7 and bishop d3, which is keeping everything as solid as possible. Nakamura gets some counterplay with the rook b2, where white has to be careful The impulsive rook takes h6 now loses to rook takes d3, exploiting the pin on the e-pawn. And Kramnik, of course, saw this though, and played instead, after rook b2, rook g2, breaking that pin. So now came rook takes a2 and rook takes h6, so white remains 2 pawns up, and what's more, they're passed pawns, so you know it's easy from here really. So bishop f7 anyway from Nakamura, and now rook h7, pinning the bishop and threatening bishop g6, winning the bishop. And Nakamura answered with king f6, but this was an inferior move that raised Kramnik's advantage to over 3 pawns, and now it's even harder to stop the c pawn. It's the main problem with king f6. A better defense was king f8, which seems counterintuitive, as usually you want your king in the center for the endgame, but the most universal of all chess ideas and theory is to play the position, and in this position king f8 was a much better continuation, although white is of course still easily winning. The line that Fritz gave goes c5, and now rook a1 to try and get behind the c pawn, but now comes rook h8 check, king e7, and rook g7, threatening both rook h7 and bishop c4, and black is losing a piece, so it'll be game over before long anyway, even with a better defense. So after king f6 anyway, comes c5, and now rook a4, aiming for counterplay with the rook takes f4, but now comes the nail in the coffin, c6, because this allows for some nice tactics after rook takes f4, c7, and rook e8, apparently stopping the pawn from queening. But now came another great move from Kramnik, and if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook takes f7 check is the move, and here Nakamura resigned because he's losing a piece and more after king takes f7, bishop g6 check, king f8, and bishop takes e8. So that's it anyway, a great game from Kramnik, who's now tied for second with Magnus Carlsen on 5.5 points out of 8. They're behind only Shirov, who's in the lead with 6 points. On Tuesday it's Carlsen against Kramnik, which should be really good, and also Ivanchuk against Shirov. So I hope you enjoyed this game. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.